Outside, so it's a perfect day for caldo de res. So this is how I make my beef caldo or my beef stew, whatever you call it. For ingredients, you're going to need beef on the bone. I usually use beef shank center cut bone in. You have to have at least some on the bone because the bone is where you get all the flavor in your broth. I am doing a combo of that and beef oxtail because that's what I had. Zucchini, red potato, cabbage, diced onion, and beef broth. So I've coated the bottom of my pan in oil just enough to cover the bottom. I have seasoned my meat with coarse salt and coarse pepper, and I'm going to quickly sear it on both sides in the pan and then remove it from the heat. If you do oxtail, make sure you end up getting another meat like the beef shank because oxtail typically doesn't have as much meat on it, but it has a ton of flavor. And make sure you sear all of the side. 1.5 cups of diced onion and stir them until they're nearly translucent. I have lowered the heat already. These don't burn, and because this soup cooks low and slow. Before anyone comes from me, there's not a lot of seasoning in the soup. This is the only time in my life you will hear me say less is more. I start out heavily seasoning the meat with coarse salt and coarse pepper, and then after that, I let the bones and everything else just add to the flavor. Really simple, hearty, cozy soup. I've been cooking down the onions for about 2 minutes. They're going to continue to cook down over the next couple of hours while the soup cooks. I'm gonna add the meat back in and then add some beef broth on top. Meat is back in and we're going to cover the meat with beef broth, and then if you need additional, add water. I usually end up using about 3 cartons of the beef broth. This is the 32 ounces. It is covered by the broth. I'm going to cover it and leave it on low to let it simmer for an hour. Your soup is simmering, you're going to come in and you're going to cut your potatoes and your zucchini. I like these a little bit bigger than bite size, but cut them to your preference. So today for my family, I ended up doing 3 red potatoes and 1 large zucchini. An hour, so I'm going to take the meat out. Meat is out and cooling so that I can easily cut it and peel it off the bone. I'm going to go ahead and put my potatoes back in and cook them for about 10 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and cut up the cabbage. You can cut this however you like. Some people like to cut them in big wedges. I like to cut these a little bit smaller and more bite-sized. As much cabbage as you'd like. My husband isn't a huge cabbage person. I love cabbage, so I put a lot of cabbage in there. Added the cabbage, stirred it in a little bit, and now I'm going to go ahead and cover it and remove the meat off my bone so that I can add the meat back in. Since I mainly used oxtail, there's not a lot of meat, so that's why I was saying make sure if you are using oxtail, which is wonderful, it has a lot of flavor in the bones, but make sure you also get some other form of meat to have in there. For reference, I had all of that, and after removing it from the bone, this is what I'm left with, which is more than enough for us, but I would have had almost nothing if I didn't have the beef shank on bones. I added the meat back in with the cabbage and potatoes and obviously the broth, and I turned the heat up a touch, and I'm going to let these cook for another 15 minutes. This has been simmering for a little while, so I'm going to add in the frozen corn on the cob and the zucchini.